And his implicit threat was if I attempted to be real about that, that he would be public about the whole thing. That I had been a monster to him, I had ripped him off. Now, this was the idea when I said, well, what is it that I've stolen from you? He said it was, we were at that time in graduate school together. He said it was that I proposed to him that we work on the idea of working with a gay man's dreams in a set. So you have the first dream he remembers and the second dream he remembers the third. Like Jung had done this, for example, most classically in Psychology and Alchemy, where he takes a series of 400 dreams and analyzes them sequentially. Don claimed to me that he had proposed this idea of doing this vis-a-vis a gay case. And I was describing to him somewhat later that I wanted to incorporate that idea as an aspect of my own dissertation and evidence to do that, and evidence of the theoretical ideas that I want to work on as the main body of my dissertation. He claimed I was stealing the idea from him. When I said that I wasn't stealing because I was happy to acknowledge that he had first suggested the idea, but rather that he was saying I couldn't use it. Because it was his.
That idea. You can't say to give his dreams.
Yeah, that's what he meant by stealing it. That therefore, if I wanted to use it, I said, but I'm complimenting you. And he remained suspicious and paranoid. Now, since then, I've done a lot more further work with lots of folks and myself, and realized that he was taking a very paranoid attitude all along. He wasn't dealing with this stuff all along. And I was naive enough, even though I'd been working on this whole problem with Harry and John and so on and so forth, that Don could pull this kind of way of being with me, where I was thrown off guard well enough that he had me fingered in this way. So once he pulled this number, I felt caught in it. And so I felt so ashamed that I couldn't do anything, even though he made sure to let me know that if I did try and do anything about it, he would attack me. So, but nonetheless, I felt so ashamed that I felt he had me under his thumb for years with this maneuver. This is in Tree Roots, which we are claiming is about dealing with gay psychology.
Right.
So, in other words, in my experience, my co-operator of this new endeavor suddenly came out with not only an anti-psychological proclamation, but stuck it to me. Used psychological understanding to turn the tables. This was even more violent. My experience is even more violent than Harry Gay had done. Vicious as Harry was. Harry was very, very vicious and ugly. But this was even more nefarious, more subtly manipulative on a shark-like level that I'd not encountered before, so purposefully directed at me. I mean, certainly I've known people like this, and like, as I mentioned, I've been an organizer at that point for a very long time. I've certainly known people like this, but not in such an involved way. So obviously I had to grow more, I had to learn more. This was during the period when I had felt I had worked very seriously, not only with the particulars of my general psychology and the layers of trauma and recovery of gay appreciativeness I had to go through, but then most specifically with the whole theme of the problem of what we might call in terms of the mother complex. But dealt with that, I felt enough sufficiently, but now I really had to begin to deal with what I consider the problems of the father complex, these problems of power versus fear. That's one way to describe that. What corresponded with this problem with Harry. This was the period of time when we were to deal with this stuff. I entered into working with Mark Thompson more carefully. He was a whole denizen of the underground SM world, which very much concerned development of certain masculine presences and capacities, certainly on the sensate level, to some extent on the emotion level. And I became his apprentice and began to enter the SM underground world here in Los Angeles. As part of that, in the early world, when I was working with the mother issues, I was much more in the radical fairy world, or the precursors to that when I lived in San Francisco. That was the world of art and culture and the so-called feminine values, and in that world, this whole SM thing, with putting on the leather and the whole the toughness and all that kind of thing, was considered utterly, utterly ridiculous and insane. So it was only after I'd worked enough with all this mother-level business that I felt that I became accessible to begin to work on aspects of male identification and masculine power themes related to relations with, ultimately with my father symbolically, that were actually involved with this whole thing and how I got stuck in the pickle with Don. And with that, what I had to learn through struggling, all simultaneous while continuing to cooperate true roots, we're continuing to put on activities, trainings and workshops and stuff like that is what we did. And we also did individual consultations, I wouldn't call them therapy then, in the 80s. Also did various things at ferry events. We weren't just a stranger on the ferries, though a minority position, as you can imagine. Locally was dominated by Harry and this anti-psychological attitude. But it was like a Big Ten, a general Big Ten thing, as long as you didn't try and push too hard against their general tone. I could go there, you know, that wasn't part of the organizing. Pretty much after the first year, we started up again in 1984. There wasn't much here in LA before 84, but was it 83? 84. Was it 84? 1984, we started up again, the local ferry scene, and I played an important role in that. Don Kilbourne helped a little bit, and then Harry was also, we all did it, but Harry didn't go to the event because it was, again, this factions began to evolve more and more seriously in the scene. That's what Chris has been writing about in his section of this new book, is this development in the local ferries around this pro-psychological versus anti-psychological factionalism that led to a big crisis outlined through the competing versions of the local newsletter, the Ferry Dish Rag, in the mid-90s, which is the documentary material we're reproducing in that section of the new book that Chris is writing an introduction to, so that he contextualizes this. It's the same issue, the same struggle. How does one be real about psychological material when to be real about is heroic defenses? You all know, I'm sure no one here would be merely unaware of what defenses really are about, and how ferocious they are, how terrifying they are, how dominant they are, how controlling they are, how sadistic they are, how massive they are, how historical they are. So, it's been a long haul, in other words, to give you a sense of it, it's been a long haul to get this practice real enough on my own part, vis-a-vis me, first of all, and then vis-a-vis whatever I'm involved in, so that folks who can follow me along, like these two, for example, eventually, first Chris, and then eventually someone who can follow along, versus folks who go, fuck that, I'm never going to face this bullshit, because I'm too fucked. But they don't do it like that, they say, fuck you, you're a murderer, kill you, right. As they storm off.
Yes.
Huh? Huh? Well, that's the way of the world. But nonetheless, I find that there are parties who are very interested in what this is really all about in the end, and it has to be tested through the trial of fire. There's no other way. And it gets cooked that way, and that's how it becomes better refined. The interest becomes more involved, and this develops further, and this has now led to way past the level I would have been at, not only with Harry, or with Don Kilbourne, or the fairies of the 90s, but even the beginning in 2005 of the Institute itself, where you see we've now reached the stage, I and a few others who can handle it and hung out together long enough and serious enough at this level of involvement, to be cooking and being with this realness around what does it mean to be gay, both in the more transpersonal and in the more demonic, in real lived time together. It's a kind of quasi-community or association, but it's not a community, because it's about political activism. It's about being associated to be activists and to work with something. So that's different than really being a community. It's about living together. It's allusions more so to like a breederism again and all that way of life. Not that it's not a community, there's just words. I don't want to be just semantic here. But nonetheless, when it got to that kind of stage where we could begin to think about this as an institute, as to kind of formalize this associative activism around being gay liberationist in this new psychological way, which had been pioneered just through first my own struggles to way back when to handle my own psychology, and then vis-a-vis because I wanted to be an activist, how to then handle Harry A because I had to be psychological about it, you know, and then I wouldn't give up about it. On and on and on. I just would not give up, and I would not bend, and I would not turn on this theme or this point or this position or this direction, and eventually it wouldn't matter if others wanted to or not wanted to follow me along versus didn't, except I might have feelings about that. But in the end, things devolved and developed the way that they did, and there were folks who liked this stuff. It's not like I'm trying to get rid of anyone, but I don't love psychoanalytic. It's stupid. It's something different than that. You know, there's this serious business, and eventually it's going to show through, not just with me, vis-a-vis others, but for others as well are going to show this kind of interest, on this kind of level of seriousness. And the folks who peeled away from me over the years showed that lack of serious interest, versus others who have been. And it's all a matter that cooks in the fire, and then you see these things show up as they are, through the developments, and how they are is then what's grown or what becomes that way. Not like it was beforehand, and by the cooking it becomes this way. So very interesting to go through these things. Can't have light except going through it. So now once the Institute is established as a way of formalizing this kind of new activist association, the question does then come up, how can that grow? How can that expand itself? Not clear perhaps at first, though it looks more self-evident maybe later on. It seemed at first, you know, just to kind of do what was done before, and Chris and Doug have alluded to, with the workshops and stuff. Now we'll kind of call them institute activities. They mentioned certain directions they tried to take. Didn't really work very well. They weren't really that lively. Because it was getting away from what was really what we were trying to do, and what was really interesting and different and unusual, under the mistaken notion that that's so ahead of the curve, it's useless to try and propagate that anyway. You know, we might enjoy ourselves privately in this organization, so to speak, but it can't be promulgated with others. The best we can do is share a little bit, and then just, I don't know what, hump along like that till we die. I don't know what, but it was not satisfying, and it was not realistic, obviously not. And this all had to be amended. So it occurred to me that something much more serious is needed, obviously, voila, training. That's a format or a way by which to imagine what it has been that I, for example, work with Chris all these years, that Chris and I have been in training with each other through that, about how to be authentic and real with our psychologies, vis-a-vis the issues that become more liberated, more gay, more real, more feelingly true, so on and so forth, over the years. And me vis-a-vis Doug, and Doug vis-a-vis Chris, and the two of them vis-a-vis me, and vice versa, and with Roger and Dustin. You know, Wendell has been involved in some important ways. How to extend this seriously, further. Thus, something more formal comes up, and this is the most ambitious that we've ever tried to be, certainly I've ever tried to be, that I've known have tried to be, about how to get at this process of inculcating something more ambitious. That comes up to, brings folks up to the level they could become members of the Institute, along with those of the few of us who are now members. It's a matter of being able to be real enough with what's really going on, deep enough, while it's happening vis-a-vis being gay-centered and being psychologically minded, to handle the intensity of it. None of us could handle the intensity of it at first. None of us could be real or psychological at all. So when I first met Doug, when I first met Chris, he's a real out of it person. When I first met Chris, he just turned 21. He didn't know psychology from a pin in the wall. A pin butterfly to the wall to be psychological to him. He didn't know anything about it. It made no sense to him whatsoever. But as you could see from how he was sharing a little while ago, of course everyone has all their own strengths and weaknesses, but you could probably sense that when Chris gets into talking about the feltness of working with the process of engagement, he knows a lot of interesting stuff. He doesn't know it in a bookish way, but he really knows his stuff, and it's through experience. Intense experience. Personal, intense experience in many, many contexts over decades. On and on and on. As you might know, since I know Chris personally, I am relentless, personally. So if I relate to him, I'm relentless personally with him. He's had it over the years, quite a bit. Nice to see that show a little bit. You know, it's also the rambling and the talking, you know, the thinking tight, so it gets a little loose there in some ways. You know, one has to be tolerant. I've had to learn to be tolerant because I'm more thinking type, and my thinking wants to trash him every time he does his bungling things and says things awkwardly and dumb. You know, and stuff like that. You know, and I have to work with that stuff. So.